Hey folks, every summer it's hard to decide what kind of vacation do you want to take. Do you want a relaxing natural getaway or do you want a new cultural artistic experience? Luckily this summer you don't have to choose. The Williamstown Theater Festival runs July 17th to August 3rd among the beautiful Berkshire Mountains in northwestern Massachusetts. It brings over 130 artists to the stage for nearly 100 performances. Discounted hotel rooms are available now. Go to WTFestival.org and immerse yourself in theater this summer. That's WTFestival.org.
Today on CityCast DC, the Trump administration is already deeply impacting DC's way of life. And now, a new Washington Post poll is providing more clarity into exactly how gutting the federal workforce and other big changes may translate for DC's economy and residents, many of whom are considering leaving DC altogether as a result. The Post's Olivia George is here to put voices behind the data. Today's Tuesday, May 13th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. So, Olivia, we already know that DOGE has been taking an axe to the federal government, and folks are worried about how this is going to affect the city, the way the city feels, who's able to stay in the city, all of it. At the Washington Post, you all just released a poll that really gave us more insight into those impacts. What does that data say?
So, unsurprisingly, residents in the region are feeling uneasy. We polled over 1,600 DC area residents on everything from kind of the mood in their household, whether they have been impacted by federal layoffs or cuts, and also things like, are they considering, moving out of the region? Are they changing their spending patterns? We found that 4 in 10 DC area residents who live in households in which a federal worker or contractor has been laid off, fired, or put on leave said they could not pay their bills on time as a result. 1 in 5 DC area residents overall say they are seriously considering moving away in the next 12 months. And that rises to 45% among those in households who say they've got a relative or they themselves have been laid off.
Wow. So for your story, you talked to 3 of these folks, and they all shared different stories. One of the folks that you spoke to for the piece was Emily Rendon. Tell me about her story.
That's right. So Emily was on the cusp of celebrating 13 years at Save the Children earlier this year when she found out that she was losing her job as a result of the administration's slashing of U.S. foreign assistance. Now she cobbles together shifts at a local diner and at a garden shop. She described relentlessly applying to jobs that are in her specific career field. But she said, the market is just flooded with people like me. She'll look on LinkedIn and she'll see job openings that have only been posted recently and already thousands of people have applied. And so at the moment she's working as a service worker. She said that she has past experience working in restaurants. So the work isn't exactly entirely new to her, but it's not exactly something that she thought she would be doing in her early 40s. She described feeling very lucky that her husband has a stable career. He's a U.S. Capitol Police officer, but he's nearing retirement. And now the two of them are thinking, when his job is no longer tying him to the region, if she's continuing to find it difficult to find full-time work, they'll probably be leaving the region. And I spoke to a lot of people that were in a similar position, had seen their kind of career paths evaporate before their eyes over recent months. And they're now thinking, we don't know what's tying us to the region anymore. Sure, they have these wonderful kind of social relationships that they're sorry to see and wave goodbye to. But if they are maybe pursuing remote work in the future, perhaps they can live in a region with a lower cost of living. Or maybe they want to be closer to family to help with childcare responsibilities and things like that.
It's such a tough set of options to have to weigh for folks who 13 years in a particular career, that's a long time. That is a lot of, education and institutional knowledge and all of that. Like, that is a difficult path to have to weigh. What about Mark? Can you tell me Mark's story?
Right. So Mark, He's not a veteran, but he described kind of with great pride what working as a contractor for the VA meant to him. He really viewed it kind of as his way of giving back and helping those who had dedicated so much to our nation. And then he abruptly realized that he was losing his job earlier this year as well. He described kind of one evening seeing he had a bunch of missed calls from his boss and knew, that so seldom is a good sign in the evening. And now he's 60 years old and scrambling to find work. He's looking at part-time copywriting jobs. He is exploring, nonprofit work. But I think it's important to remind folks that the job market isn't just kind of being flooded with former federal workers that are looking for jobs, but also contract workers. And not only is hiring dynamics changing a lot when it comes specifically to the federal workforce, but a lot of nonprofits and other groups in the DC region that rely on federal funding are also, seeing their ability to hire new people really dry up. And so in the meantime, Mark described to me that he's, taking on extra volunteering shifts just because it gives him something to do. He's not the type of person that wants to, sit around all day kind of in isolation. He, is in a position that he didn't necessarily expect he would be in, age 60. And he has children, that are young adults that are in the workforce and worried about their own kind of economic prospects. And so there are really these ripple effects, and this fear and anxiety is gripping households and whole communities across not just the DC region, of course, but across the country.
What about Julia Tanton?
Julia found out that she was losing her job shortly after giving birth. And the bad news didn't stop there. Shortly after that, her husband lost his job. And then very swiftly, they went from, a 2-income household with no newborn to 2 parents looking for work. And they have a newborn baby in a house that they only bought about a year ago, unsure kind of how they were going to stay afloat. Both of them continue to be on the job hunt. But like I said earlier, they've kind of seen their career paths in some ways evaporate before their eyes as the administration takes a very different tack when it comes to funding foreign assistance. And one of them was a USAID employee, and one of them, her husband, worked for the U.S. Institute of Peace. They, love the life that they've built for themselves. They love their community. But described, the anxiety and worry that they're feeling is really rippling throughout their social scene as well, with lots of different households losing their job. And they described, making small lifestyle tweaks, letting go of their housekeeper, delaying home renovation projects, taking one of their sons out of summer camp. And I think that there are some people who would kind of scoff at those adjustments. Letting your house cleaner go isn't exactly facing, it's not like you're facing imminent homelessness, for example. But I think that those small tweaks are also important to pay attention to, because they serve a reminder that when an individual loses their job, the impacts of that are multifold, right? It changes their family's spending patterns. It changes how they're interacting with the local economy. And so it's all these kind of small ways that I'm really interested in continuing to pay attention to build this broader picture about what these changes mean to the DC economy, especially in the context that the local region was in some ways still kind of feeling the burn of the pandemic.
If you've never visited the Folger Shakespeare Theater, now is the time. It's showing the Shakespearean classic Twelfth Night, but with a groundbreaking modern twist that brings pure joy. This is not the Shakespeare that you fell asleep reading in 10th grade. It is a contemporary, sexy production of Shakespeare's great comedy. Sure, there's loss, love, and identity, but there's also a sense of discovery, lavish costumes, and great modern music. The director used the term elegant kink while describing it to me, so you already know you're in for a ride. Think She's the Man meets RuPaul's Drag Race. Performances start on May 13th and run through June 22nd. And tickets are going fast. Don't wait. Go to folger.edu/12th night to purchase tickets. That's folger.edu/1, 2, TH night.
Hi, I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast. We've all set health goals: lose weight, exercise more, eat better. But without a plan, those goals often fade. That may have happened to you. It has definitely happened to me. And that's where Prolon comes in. Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet gives you a science-backed, structured approach to stay on track and see real results. And now Prolon is upping their game with the new next-gen 5-day program, delivering the same science-backed benefits in a cleaner, more convenient, and more flavorful format. Prolon is a plant-based nutrition program featuring soups, snacks, and beverages designed to nourish the body while keeping it in a fasting state, triggering cellular rejuvenation and renewal. Next Gen builds on the original Prolon with 100% organic soups and teas, a richer taste, and ready-to-eat meals. Developed over decades at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by top U.S. medical centers, Prolon has been shown to support biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. I've been doing the 5-day program, and I feel so much better. I really enjoy the tasty energy bars, the snacks and soups, and the fact that I can enjoy meals, even though the calorie count is super low. The flavors and textures are excellent. An olive oil snack here, broccoli and quinoa soup there, hibiscus tea, a yummy nut bar. It's got the benefits of a 5-day fast, but doesn't have the challenge of doing it with pure liquids. It's a system reset. And also, I know this sounds funny, but it's not. The packaging and directions are fantastic, clear, and well organized and thoughtful. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering CityCast listeners 15% off site-wide, plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/city. That's PROLONLIFE.com/city to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/city.
These stories are so heartbreaking, and I'm curious what it was like for you hearing these stories of people talking about how their entire career, a decade career just evaporated, or, they've got a newborn baby and they're not sure what they're going to do. What was it like hearing these stories, and how did they compare to other stories that you've reported on here in DC?
I'll begin by saying that I'm always so grateful when people pick up my phone or respond to my email or answer poll questions and are willing to kind of not just let me in, but then let the broader public into what are really difficult and painful moments of their individual lives. I spoke to many more people than I could quote in this story, a lot of whom said, I think that this is really important. I want to share what I've been going through, but I don't want my name out there in public. There was a lot of fear, either that they personally might be kind of ridiculed online, or that the organization or nonprofit that they work for could face potential backlash, or maybe they have a spouse who continues to work in the federal workforce and then were hesitant about kind of putting their family name out there. So that was a difficult kind of tension to weigh too. And I was really grateful for the people that were quoted in the story that kind of allowed their name to be attached to what they were experiencing. But I heard again and again that people were motivated in kind of speaking up and opening their homes and their lives to a journalist because there's this hope that in sharing these stories and the ways in which they're kind of on the individual basis navigating the current economic climate, that readers throughout the region, but more broadly across the country, will understand that, DC isn't just this faceless location where the federal government is situated, right? These are vibrant, interesting communities filled with people doing lots of different type of work that are really feeling fear and uncertainty as a result of what is happening in the overhauling of the federal government. So that was interesting too, to, time and time again, hear that people aren't just stressed about the economic climate that they're navigating, but they're also, navigating that uncertain path with this kind of barrage of feedback that DC is little more than this kind of like bureaucratic, bloated, like faceless wasteland, you know? And so that was interesting too, that people were keen to have kind of a human face put on these broader topics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just deeply grateful that we have people who see DC for the complex place that it is, and that we're not just, you know, I mean, I know that feeling that you described of also being told that, like, oh, there's not really people in DC, this doesn't really matter. Like, that is a feeling that I feel like I combat quite often. And so I'm happy that there are folks like you who are interested in telling the stories of the residents who live here who are often overlooked. Are there stories that stand out to you that were not able to be included in the piece?
I spoke to a range of people who are nearing retirement age, and those stories didn't kind of specifically make it into this piece, but I'm hoping to kind of be attentive to that in future work. And some of those perspectives were interesting because there was this feeling of like, how long should we stick it out for? Maybe they were a couple years off of retirement, but have seen, let's say if for those who are federal workers, they've seen their teams be gutted, and a lot of the colleagues that they valued collaborating with and learning from have either walked out the door or have been laid off or fired, and they are maybe beginning to cast their attention elsewhere and thinking that they should be joining the private sector or working for a nonprofit. But again, they're aware of the difficult job market that they would be entering into if they did decide to kind of hang up the federal position that they have. So that was interesting. I'm also really interested in continuing to speak to and write about early career professionals and what these changes to the federal workforce and spending patterns mean for them. I think the DC region is home to a lot of great higher education institutions that in some ways really pride themselves on kind of a public service mindset and a launching pad to people that are interested in joining the Foreign Service or being involved in domestic policy or, different nonprofit advocacy roles. And so I'm interested in what those career paths look like moving forward and kind of what happens when people who maybe move to the DC region with these ambitions or, to join these fields of work that we see currently being changed in quite drastic ways. What happens when they no longer view this region as a place where those career paths can kind of take root? And I think with the summer months approaching, and kids not being in school, I'm also really interested in staying in touch with some families that I know a couple months ago were mulling whether or not they should move, but wanted to at least wait until the end of the school year to think more deeply about it. And I guess I'll note too, like moving it can be expensive, right? Even if you're moving to a region with a lower cost of living, there's a cost obviously incurred with the move itself. So curious to think about people that are staying in the region but maybe downsizing or moving in with in-laws to make their rent payments.
This episode of CityCast is sponsored by Babbel. Learning a new language opens the door to new friends, new cultures, maybe even a whole new life. So why not start the journey today with Babbel? You can start speaking a new language with confidence thanks to Babbel's conversation-based technique. It quickly teaches you useful words and phrases about the things you actually talk about in the real world. There are more than a dozen languages available for you to learn at your own pace, with material tailored to your individual proficiency level, interests, and time availability. I'm David Plott, CEO of CityCast, and I've been learning Spanish with Babbel and brushing up a teeny bit on my French. But there's also Turkish, Swedish, Dutch, German, many more languages. Babbel's tips and tools for learning a new language are approachable and accessible. It's like having a private tutor in your pocket. I particularly love Babbel's guided conversations, which let me practice real-world conversations. What to say at the doctor's office, how to leave a party. using speech recognition to make sure I'm getting the pronunciation right. Babbel's mobile app and website have real-time feedback, progress trackers, and clear visualizations. They're helping me improve my Spanish in only 10 minutes a day. So get talking with Babbel. I want you to learn another language, so I'm teaming up with Babbel to gift you 55% off subscriptions, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 55% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Are you still quoting 30-year-old movies? Have you said cool beans in the past 90 days? Do you think Discover isn't widely accepted? If this sounds like you, you're stuck in the past. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. Welcome to the now. It pays to Discover. Learn more at discover.com/credit card, based on the February 2024 Nielsen report.
I'm curious if you have a sense of how all of this might impact just the vibe of DC. Like, obviously, with people are losing jobs or not sure how they're going to pay their bills or not able to pay their bills, that's going to translate whether you work for the federal government or not. What is this going to mean for DC in a larger sense?
That's a great question. And I think, we're seeing unemployment claims rise. We're seeing consumers pulling back on spending. Some of my colleagues had a great story recently just about all of these worries of an economic slump. And I think the changes will be both big and small, right? And I'm really interested in both. One of my colleagues in their recent story had a statistic that I thought was really telling. They reported that so far there have only been 3 permits issued for new tower cranes this fiscal year, which began in October 1st. And as recently as 2023, there were 29. So that's a big difference, right? We're seeing this shift in the federal workforce trickle down not only into kind of individual spending patterns, but broader worries that construction in DC, the DC region, is going to be impacted. And as far as kind of like vibes go, again, I think people kind of sometimes like scoff at that, but I think that those are really important things to be paying attention to as well. You have communities where people are seeing their neighbors leave as they kind of mull their own next steps. It's going to be interesting to see if there's like a trickle-down effect to school enrollment and things like that. I mean, one other thing I'll note, a perspective that didn't make it into the story because the person didn't feel comfortable going fully on the record, but a conversation that I was nonetheless grateful to have was with someone who their position is paid for by a federal grant, and they are feeling a lot of stress about that money drying up or that contract being canceled kind of any day now. But he said, while he's kind of reining in his spending and trying to make sure that he has his own kind of financial ducks in a row and all of this worry and stress that's kind of eating him up, he's like doubling down on community involvement, whether that's, contributing more to local food banks or volunteering in certain ways, taking on like kind of a more active role in his Buy Nothing Facebook group, and just all of the ways that kind of on the ground level strengthen his connection and communication with his local community had taken on this like additional importance to him when so much at the macro level feels in flux. And so as my colleagues and I continue to report these types of stories, a lot of which will be heavy and hard and negative, I'm also interested in continuing to look for ways in which people are locking arms or, really trying to ground themselves in the things which they love about their life in the DC region.
Oh, almost universally, everybody that I've spoken to who finds himself in that situation, and even if you aren't a federal worker, I think that so much at the sort of high level, federal, national level feels scary and uncertain and out of our control. And so the flip side of that is really leaning into community, leaning into hyperlocal, leaning into the things that you feel like you do have a little bit more control over, like what's happening on your block, in your local community.
Right, right. And I think kind of tangentially related, something that I'm also interested in paying attention to is how these changing dynamics influence like local residents getting more involved in local politics, and also just nationally, like people paying attention to DC, not just as the home of the federal government, but like how is the federal government and how are local elected officials interacting with the federal government. Those kinds of dynamics and like areas for people to be engaged in, I think are really interesting too. So I'm curious to see in the next couple months how those forces take shape too. And like, I mean, anecdotally, I've been hearing from people who say that they feel more engaged at the local level than they have in a really long time.
Well, speaking of the local level, I do know that DC's chief financial officer warned that the city could lose as many as 40,000 jobs over the next few years, which he estimates would cost the city more than $1 billion in revenue. I guess the big question here is like, it seems like DC is headed for a recession. What's your sense?
Right. So my colleague said a wonderful story out last week that was a really comprehensive look at this. And I mean, there were lots of kind of worrying data points that pointed towards this impending economic slump, whether that was unemployment claims being on the up, consumer spending taking a downturn. I think that they reported new unemployment claims were up 167% in February compared to just a year before. And if you zoom in and look specifically at federal workers, unemployment claims jumped to 285 from just 8 in February 2024. We, of course, saw the bond rating agency Moody's downgrade the district's rating, basically stripping the district of its coveted AAA bond rating and probably raising borrowing cost. And the agency specifically cited the Trump administration's, quote, substantial cuts to the federal workforce and revised the district's outlook to negative. And then there's the statistic that I mentioned earlier about, the new crane permits being drastically smaller than they were for fiscal year as recently as 2023. So we have all these metrics. It's not looking super rosy for the district at the moment. But I think even before the new administration took office, there was definitely a sense among, city officials and local elected officials that DC should kind of be on this mission of diversifying its economy. I think we see that in, the mayor's rhetoric around sport and entertainment. And so while perhaps that mission has taken on new urgency in recent months, it's definitely something that has been on the minds of local elected officials for quite a long time. This question of like, how do we diversify the district's economy so that we are not being quite as reliant on the federal government? But in terms of kind of the specific recession question, I think there's no doubt that the region's economy is kind of teetering on the edge of quite a painful slump. Things aren't looking fantastic.
And more than 17% of DC's employed residents work for the federal government. So this idea of like diversifying, it does sort of make sense. I mean, I don't know if this is a question you can answer, but how alarmed should we be here in DC?
I'll probably defer that to economists and policy specialists, but I think one thing that is important to note, you mentioned that 17% of the region being employed by the federal government. It's really important to forget that that doesn't even include the many, many more employees of companies and nonprofits that depend on federal spending, right? There are like the people that are directly employed by the federal government, but many, many more who are still feeling the repercussions of the reshaping of the federal workforce, even though they themselves are not a federal employee. They may work for a nonprofit or a lobbying company or a legal firm or whoever. I try not to be an alarmist, but I'll defer your specific question perhaps to others.
Fair. Do you know if DC has a strategy to counteract all of this?
So, one thing perhaps that's interesting to note is both in and around the district, we've seen local governments and state governments really kind of actively position themselves as employers of people who have perhaps recently been laid off by the federal workforce. This, I should say, isn't just limited to the DC region. Across the country, we've seen state governments like launch advertisement campaigns where they say like, hey, smart federal workers, we want you to join us. We've seen more locally town halls and job fairs kind of specifically set up for people who have experienced federal worker layoffs. So I think that's interesting. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's this like broader emphasis, which I think predates the current administration, that DC should be looking for ways to diversify, not specifically its workforce, but like its economy writ large. And like how I'm interested in continuing to talk to tourism officials, for example, like how are we pitching what the district can offer, not just to residents, but also people that are interested in visiting and like spending their tourism dollars here.
Well, Olivia, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for doing this work. The piece is heartbreaking, but I think is definitely one that folks should read if they want to get a better handle on what's actually happening in DC right now.
I really appreciate your time and thoughtful questions. Thanks so much.
Before we go, I want to give a big thank you to our newest CityCast DC neighbors, Brian B., Kip W., and Don G. Thank you for your support. If you want the great perks of being a CityCast neighbor too, like a thank you here, ad-free listening, and a chance to shout out your favorite local business, sign up at membership.citycast.fm. That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed today's show, share it with a friend. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.